Random House Audiobooks presents Star Wars, Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, by Terry Brooks, based on the screenplay by George Lucas, read for you by Michael Cumpsty.
A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away. Tatooine. The suns burned down out of a cloudless blue sky, washing the vast desert wastes of the planet in brilliant white light. The resultant glare rose off the flat, sandy surface in a wet shimmer of blistering heat to fill the gaps between the massive cliff faces and solitary outcroppings of the mountains that were the planet's sole distinguishing feature. When the pod racers streaked past, engines roaring with ferocious hunger and relentless drive, the heat and the light seemed to shatter and the mountains themselves to tremble. Anakin Skywalker leaned into the curve of the raceway that took him past the stone archway marking the entry into Beggar's Canyon on the first lap of the run, easing the thruster bars forward, giving the engines a little more juice. He ripped into the canyon, fingers playing across the controls, hands steady on the steering. One mistake, one misjudgment, and he would be out of the race, and lucky if he wasn't dead. That was the thrill of it. All that power, all that speed, just at his fingertips, and no margin for error. Control cables ran from the pod to the engines, and energy binders locked the engines to each other. If any part of the three struck something solid, the whole of the assembly would collapse in a splintering of metal and a fiery wash of rocket fuel. A grin split Anakin's young face as he injected a bit more power into the thrusters. A flash of gleaming orange metal shot past him on his right, and Anakin watched the distinctive split X of Sebulba's engines flare out before him, taking away the lead he had seized through an unusually quick start. His brow wrinkled in disgust at himself for his momentary lapse of concentration and his dislike of the other racer. All gangly and crook-legged, Sebulba was as twisted inside as out, a dangerous adversary who won often and took delight in doing so at the expense of others. Anakin pushed the thruster bars forward, fed fresh power to the engines, and rocketed ahead. It didn't help, he supposed, as he watched the distance between them narrow, that he was the only human ever to drive in the pod races. The ultimate test of skill and daring on Tatooine, and the favorite spectator sport of the citizens of Mos Espa, it was supposed to be beyond the skill and capability of any human. The most famous racers, the best of a rare breed, were strangely shaped, complexly formed beings with a penchant for taking risks that bordered on insanity. But Anakin Skywalker, while nothing like these, was so intuitive in his understanding of the skills required by his sport and so comfortable with its demands that his lack of these other attributes seemed to matter not at all. It was a source of some mystery to everyone, and a source of disgust and growing irritation to Sebulba in particular. The racers whipped through columns of ancient statuary and across the floor of the arena erected on the edge of Mos Espa. They swept under the winner's arch, past row upon row of seats crammed with spectators cheering them on, past droid pits, repair stations, and the boxes where the Hutts watched in isolated splendor above the commoners. From an overlook in a tower centered on the arch, the two-headed Troig who served as announcer would be shouting out their names and positions to the crowd.
I see Ben Quadranero from the Chum system.
Anakin allowed himself a momentary glimpse of blurred figures that were left behind so fast they might have been nothing more than a mirage. His mother, Shmi, would be among them, worrying, as she always did. She hated watching him drive in the pod races, but she couldn't help herself. She never said so, but he thought she believed that simply by being there she could keep him from coming to harm. And it worked so far. He had crashed twice and failed to finish even once, but after more than half a dozen races, he was unharmed. And he liked having her there. It gave him a strange sort of confidence in himself. Besides, what choice did they have in the matter? He raced because he was good at it. Watto knew he was good at it. And whatever Watto wanted of him, he would do. That was the price you paid when you were a slave. And Anakin Skywalker had been a slave all his life. Arch Canyon rose broad and deep before him, an expanse of rock leading into Jag Crag Gorge, a twisting channel the racers were required to navigate on their way to the high flats beyond. Sebulba was just ahead, rocketing low and tight across the ground, trying to put some distance between Anakin and himself. Behind Anakin, close now, were 3 other racers, spread out against the horizon. A quick glance revealed Mahanik, Gascano, and Rimkar trailing in his strange bubble pod. All 3 were gaining. Anakin started to engage his thrusters, then drew back. Response time in the channel was compacted down to almost nothing. It was better to wait. But Rimkar was not content to wait and roared past Anakin split seconds before they entered the cleft and disappeared into darkness. When they emerged into the light once more, Anakin jammed the thruster bars forward. Ahead, Rimkar had caught Sebulba and was trying to edge past. Side by side, the racers tore across the high flats, headed for Meta Drop. Anakin closed on them. People said what they wanted about Watto, and there was plenty to say that wasn't good. He had an eye for pod racers. The big engines jumped obediently as Anakin fed fuel into the thrusters, and in seconds he was drawing alongside Sebulba's Split X. The 3 were even when they reached Meta Drop and rocketed over and tumbled straight down. The trick with drops, as every racer knew, was to gather enough speed going down to gain time over your opponents, but not so much speed that he couldn't pull out of the drop and level out again before he nosedived into the rocks below. So when Sebulba pulled out early, Anakin was momentarily surprised. Then he felt the backwash of the Split X engines hammer into his pod. The treacherous Doug had only looked as if he would pull out, and instead had lifted away and then deliberately fishtailed atop both Anakin and Rimkar, using his exhaust to slam them against the cliff face. Rimkar, caught completely by surprise, jammed his thruster bars forward in an automatic response that took him right into the mountain. Metal fragments careened away from the rock wall in a fiery shower, leaving a long black scar along the ravaged surface. Anakin might have gone the same way, but for his instincts. Almost before he knew what he was doing, he lifted out of his own descent and away from the mountain, almost colliding with a surprised Sebulba, who veered off wildly to save himself. But Anakin's sudden wrenching of his pod steering took him spinning out of control. He struck the ground in a bone-wrenching skid that severed both control cables, the big engines flying off in 2 directions, while the pod careened first left, then right, and began to roll. Metal shrieked in protest, and dust filled the pod's interior. Somewhere off to his right, an engine exploded in a ground-shaking roar. Finally, the pod stopped, tilted wildly to one side. Anakin loosened his restraining belt and crawled out. Overhead, the last of the pod racers streaked away into the blue horizon, engines whining and booming. Silence followed, deep and profound. Anakin Skywalker sat down with his back against the ruined pod, gaining what small relief he could from its shadow in the glare of Tatooine's twin suns. A land speeder would be along in a few minutes to pick him up. Watto would be there to chew him out. His mother would be there to give him a hug and take him home. He wasn't satisfied with how things had turned out, but he wasn't discouraged either.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?